What's up, everybody? My name's Adam McDormand, and this is American Literature. This week, we're going to look at what may very well be the most important text that you're going to read this entire year. It's a text that has been called The Letter from a Birmingham Jail by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. As always, the best way for us to get the most out of this text will be for us to know a little bit about the background of the author himself, to know a little bit about the historical context surrounding this letter, and lastly, to frame a couple of big ideas that we'll use as a lens through which to view this text. Martin Luther King Jr. lived from 1929 to 1968. He was born in Atlanta, Georgia, to a very religious family, and at age 5, his father renamed him after the German Protestant reformer Martin Luther. That's the Martin Luther. King graduated from Morehouse College at age 19 in 1948. And at this point, he decided that the best way for him to serve humanity was to enter the ministry. So he did just that. He studied for several more years, eventually finishing his PhD in theology in 1955 while serving as a pastor at a Baptist church in Montgomery, Alabama. Meanwhile, troubles brewing in Montgomery. Early in 1955, a 15-year-old girl named Claudette Colvin was arrested because she refused to give up her seat for a white person on a crowded bus. Later that same year, that exact thing happened to Rosa Parks in her famous moment where she refused to give up her seat for a white person. In response to this, Martin Luther King Jr. was tapped to lead a citywide boycott of public transportation that lasted over a year, resulting in the end of segregation of buses in that city. King's leadership in this boycott helped to make him a very well-known and well-respected figure in the American Civil Rights Movement. And so in a way, the Montgomery Bus Boycott was kind of the precursor to all of the important work that King would do in his life. As a leader in the American Civil Rights Movement, King was a proponent of nonviolent resistance. That means seeking political change through things like marches and protests, civil disobedience, which is essentially a refusal to obey unjust laws, sit-ins, and economic resistance like boycotts. During one of these civil rights campaigns in Birmingham in 1963, King was arrested for purposefully breaking an injunction that the city had put in place against protests of any kind. While Dr. King was in jail, a group of 8 white clergymen wrote an open letter and published it in local newspapers. The letter encouraged its readers, and of course King by extension, just to be patient and pursue the solutions they were looking for through the proper channels of the legal system. Essentially saying, just wait. Eventually you'll get what you're looking for, but it's going to be on our time. Just wait. You can imagine how incredibly frustrating that would be. So while King is in jail, he started writing a response to that letter, actually in the margins of a copy of that newspaper, just scribbled on the side. That letter would go on to be called Letter from a Birmingham Jail. And that's the text that you're actually going to be reading an excerpt from this week. Now we'll talk a little bit more specifically about Letter from a Birmingham Jail at the end of this video. But it's important also to know some things about King's final years. In the mid-60s, Dr. King expanded the focus of his platform to address not just issues of race, but also issues of poverty, of capitalism, and of war. He began to gain so much support in these various areas of political concern that the FBI classified him as a radical and put him under surveillance. Think back to our time with James Baldwin and how the FBI viewed him as a threat as well, and how they kept a really extensive file on him. Well, that was nothing compared to what they had on Martin Luther King Jr. The FBI had over 17,000 pages of documents, including various forms of surveillance and wiretap transcripts. That would be enough material to make a textbook that is over 2.5 feet thick. Think about a textbook that's 2.5 feet thick. That's That's pretty big. Now, the Bureau even went as far as to send King a very threatening letter with the intent to pressure King to end his public activism. And that may be putting it nicely. King kind of interpreted that letter as an attempt to blackmail him into committing suicide. Let me remind you that this is an official organization within the government that is trying to bully a single individual into killing himself. He presents that much of a threat to the status quo. All of this was leading up to what would essentially become his final campaign. In February 1968, 2 sanitation workers in Memphis, Tennessee were crushed to death by a malfunctioning garbage truck. This was a horrible tragedy, and black employees citywide went on strike, demanding safer working conditions and better pay. At first, King was a little bit hesitant to get involved in a situation in Memphis, but he viewed the pursuit of economic justice as vital to equality. It was, and still is, a necessary part of civil rights for all people. So he remained involved in the nonviolent resistance in Memphis, Tennessee across several months. I want to take a moment to look at an iconic image from the strikes in Memphis, Tennessee. I want you to look at this picture and think about the story that it tells. I want you to look at the signs that these men are wearing. It says, "I am a man." Think about the pursuit of dignity, the pursuit of identity that these men are engaging in. Literally at the threat of death, they're willing to go that far to be acknowledged as having dignity, to be viewed in the biblical sense as made in the image of God. That's what's happening here. It's that significant a moment. The situation in Memphis, Tennessee culminated in a speech called "Ive Been to the Mountaintop." And I want us to take just a couple of moments to watch the last part of that speech, because he says some really important things in that speech that are borderline prophetic.
Well, I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead. But it really doesn't matter with me now, because I've been to the mountaintop. I don't mind. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
I want to emphasize what King says at the climax of this speech. He says, "I've been to the mountaintop," which is him essentially saying, I've seen what's coming. I have a sense of what this place will be like if we can continue to do the work. He goes on to say, "I might not get there with you, but that's okay. I'm at peace. It'd be nice to live, to see the culmination of my work, to see the fruits of my labor, but if I don't get there, I know that we, as a people, will arrive." It's almost biblical in its proportion. The imagery that he evokes there is grand and triumphant. And that's how he ends it. It's a kind of a mic drop moment for Martin Luther King Jr. And as though he was prophesying his own end, less than 24 hours later, on April 4th, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was tragically assassinated. I'm not even sure how to articulate the significance of that moment. Dr. King becomes a martyr for a cause that is bigger than him. And it's important for us to recognize that. So let's take a look at the specifics of Letter from a Birmingham Jail. As the title of this text suggests, this is an open letter, which of course is a response to the open letter written by the 8 white clergymen that were acting as representatives of the white church. In this letter, King takes issue with people of power, and specifically, he's talking to the power that is represented by the white church at the time. Okay, very important to have in the back of your mind as you're reading this text, because this text contains what is arguably the most powerful articulation of King's philosophy. Of course, it's taken us a while to get to this point in our reading for this year, and that's because there are some really important literary ideas that King is building on here. King evokes the Apostle Paul, who also wrote several of his epistles, and that's a word that literally means letters, while he was in prison. That includes Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, and Philemon, some of those containing the most important bits of theology that Christians live by to this very day. King also references the American founders, often citing Thomas Jefferson and the Declaration of Independence, some key ideals and values of freedom that are presented in those founding documents. King can't help but to echo Henry David Thoreau and all of the Transcendentalists because of their ideas concerning civil disobedience and the pushing back against the status quo of society. Letter from a Birmingham Jail is such a rich and introspective text. There are several different big thematic concepts that we could pull from the reading, including things like love and persistence, unity, patriotism, faith, and several others. But I really want you to focus on one idea in particular, and that is the idea of justice. Even this one big idea has so many different layers and facets that we could pull out of this text that I think it's the most important one for us to start with on a first reading. Think of it this way. When we talk about justice, we could mean a whole host of different things. We could be referring to political justice, which means legal equality and equal standing in the eyes of the law. We could be referring to economic justice, which means giving individuals access to opportunities that can help them to move up in the world, to increase their standing, and to give their children a better life than they had, right? We're talking about the American dream. Or we could be referring to social justice. We could be talking in this sense about recognition and dignity, personhood. And this may seem like the least important of the three, but I assure you that it is not. It is a vital part of the human existence to be recognized as a person. Think back to that image from the Memphis, Tennessee sanitation worker strike. Those men were willing to give their lives to be recognized as men. I am a man. I am a person. I am made in the image of God. So that raises some questions. Who's responsible for justice? Is it just the oppressed person who needs to do the right thing in order to receive their justice? Or is there a responsibility placed on people of power to make sure that that power is wielded to the benefit of all, that justice is for everyone? And furthermore, to what lengths should one go to obtain justice, and by what means? Martin Luther King Jr. was an advocate of nonviolent resistance. That's a term that you're going to see in a lot of his readings. I want to end this discussion the very same way that I ended our time with James Baldwin, and that is to say that racism is real and racism is wrong. When you think about those three facets of justice, political justice, economic justice, social justice, it may seem like we have made important and significant steps forward since King's time in all three of those areas. And indeed, we definitely have. But if you think about the dream that Martin Luther King Jr. had, the vision that he saw from the mountaintop of what was coming, of what was possible if we stay the course, there's still a long way for us to go. There are still major systemic inequalities that certain people face. Remember that last lecture when I said that there is a story, a narrative of oppression that is still being written in the lives of people in America to this very day. And if we believe in the great commandments of Jesus Christ, then we have to love God enough to seek justice for our neighbor. Racism is real. Racism is wrong. It's tough. It's difficult. It's painful to engage with this topic, but we need to have the courage to look it in the eyes and say, no more. It's time to pursue justice for our neighbor. That may look different for each one of us. Maybe that's serving your individual neighbors in your community. Maybe that's being cognizant of how you engage in the voting system in America and being responsible enough to have a say in how things go. And for some of us, it may be a matter of recognizing the artistic representation of narrative in people's lives and to be willing to engage with the stories of our neighbors, to be a part of those stories, to step into that narrative of oppression and stand in solidarity with one another. I get it. It's a very heavy topic, very challenging text, but I really hope that you take the time to engage with this text, give it your full attention, and we'll get together and discuss it very soon. Until next time, good luck, have fun, what a time to be alive.